In this video, I'm going to talk about 10 tips and tricks for character animation in Clip Studio Paint. I'm a 2D animator currently working in the Japanese industry, and Clip is the software I use for my job. If you're a beginner, knowing these tips will facilitate things for you and make animation more enjoyable. If you've animated before, stick around because you may find something new. Separate the character's still parts from the moving parts. In this case, the still drawing is the body and the animation is only the eyes. We can separate them by having two animation folders, one for the body and a second one above for the eyes. The still drawing could also be a regular folder with normal layers. However, sometimes it's convenient for them to be animation folders with one cell. For example, it's easier to move it along the timeline. Regular folders are harder to move. You can also jump between cells and layers more intuitively. This separation is also common when a character is not moving and the wind moves the hair or clothes, or in dialogues where the mouth or jaw is the only thing moving. But you could separate the character however you find convenient. We not only separate the stills from the moving parts, but also if they have a different timing with more drawings. In this example, the body stopped moving and the hair had additional bounces because of the momentum of the action. Again, the body is separated in the first animation folder, but this time it has cells with movement. The hair is in a separate folder above with two more cells that continue the movement after the body stops. This division is also convenient while animating because the hair follows and moves according to the body. So I solved the body's animation first and used it to know how to animate the hair. This could scale to more elaborate scenes. Just remember the rule of thumb: separate elements that have different timing. Instead of creating a new animation cell by clicking this button, create a new folder over the Layers panel. The animation cells in the timeline can also be folders. This way you can have multiple layers within the same cell, or even multiple folders with more layers and make all the mess you need. In the timeline, there's only going to be that one cell looking clean. This way, you could work all the stages of your animation within the same animation folder. Or you could draw characters using several layers, maybe to try different poses, like with a normal illustration. Without using folders, we're stuck to one single layer per cell, wasting the Layers panel advantages. The other amazing feature is that after creating this folder, whenever you create more cells, they will be created with all the layers in the same arrangement and even with the same names as my previous cell. Since that first folder was created through the Layers panel, don't forget to assign it to the timeline. Right-click on the first frame and select the corresponding number. Speaking of assigning folders to cells, you can reassign cells anytime you want along the timeline. This way you can reuse your drawings. For example, this blink animation only has 3 drawings, but we are reusing 2 of them to open the eye again. This is an example of a boomerang type of loop. Reassign cells in the timeline to make a regular loop. You don't have to get to this menu every time. You can even click the cell, press Alt to duplicate, and drop it to another frame in the timeline. You can even select several cells at the same time, press Alt, and reassign them by dropping them in other frames. Just be careful with moving cells because you could overwrite by mistake. Don't worry, they are still in the Layers panel, but you may lose track of their position in the timeline. This is not only useful for loops. Animation has lots of situations where you would want to reuse a drawing. Take into account that all cells with the same number are the same, so any change you make to one of them will happen to the rest. So what if you want to reuse a drawing and be able to make changes to that individual cell? Well, we have the good old copy-paste. Select the cell you want, Ctrl-Z to copy and Ctrl-V to paste. It didn't show up in the timeline, but it's in the Layers panel, so we just have to assign it, and now we have an independent copy. Any change we make won't affect the original. And of course, you can use the beautiful Press Alt to duplicate shortcut, either for a particular layer or for the whole folder. Just be mindful of the organization of the Layers panel, because that will be reflected in the timeline. Any issue you find in the timeline, look at the Layers panel to fix it. By the way, adding cells between consecutive numbers creates weird naming. You can rename them by right-clicking in the animation folder, edit track, renaming timeline order. And going back to tips number 1 and 2, sometimes it's easier to start drawing the character all together, or maybe you realize later that you better divide the character in layers. Well, you can also select a part of your drawing to copy and paste to another cell. This tip is not only for reusing drawings, but also to reorganize them however is best for your animation. The onion skin is a very common tool for animation. In the settings, animation, show animation cells, onion skin settings, you may have more cells visible for the previous and next keyframes. I almost always have only one cell visible. Whichever the case, sometimes I want to reduce the number of visible drawings. And maybe I'm concentrating, animating fast, so it's kind of a drag to go to animation, show animation cells, onion skin settings, and modify the number. Especially because then I have to return to the menu to change it back. So what I like to do is turn off the visibility in the Layers panel. The onion skin's visibility is affected as well. It's a quick way to change which and how many cells you see without going all the way to the settings menu. The onion skin is cool and everything, but sometimes it gets in the way, and the best way to visualize the animation's flow is good old flipping the pages. To do that digitally, I sometimes scrub the timeline, moving the playhead back and forth, but since I'm using the pen to do this, I cannot draw at the same time. So I also have shortcuts. I use the number pad, numbers 1 and 3, to jump between previous and next cells. This way I can draw while flipping from one drawing to the next. I also use 4 and 6 to move to previous and next frames, number 7 to create a new cell, and number 9 to play and stop the playback. In computers that don't have a number pad, I replace shortcuts that I do not use, like these 2 keys or maybe these 2. The onion skin and flipping the pages are useful, but sometimes we need something more powerful, and that is the light table. In short, it's like a more powerful onion skin. It allows us to use any layer as a reference, with the possibility to move it around, rotate and scale it without affecting the original layer. In the window menu, there is a panel called Animation Cels. In this panel, we enable the light table with this button. And I also toggle on the cell-specific light table and the general light table. They may be collapsed down here, so bring them up. And now we have 3 sections. The first one is the actual layer where we draw and edit. If I add a new layer in the Layers panel, you can see it also appeared here. So this is a reflection of the Layers panel. The second section is the Cels light table, and to use it, you can grab and drop any layer you want. So for example, I'm on the last keyframe and I want to use the first keyframe as a reference. So I grab the layer from the Layers panel and drop it, and there it is! You can change its color over here. We have the same color modes available. You can move it around, rotate it maybe, and this won't affect the original first keyframe. You can even add more layers if you want. And the third section is the general light table. As the name suggests, whatever we put here will be available across all cells. You could add the character sheet or any reference that you'd like to see all the time. I don't use the general light table often because I prefer to keep the canvas as clean as possible, but I have it enabled for another reason, and that is to move layers around. If I want to use these reference layers for another cell, I can drop them in the general light table, move to the cell I want, and drop them back to the cell's individual light table. Another very cool use of this is that sometimes the Layers panel has a lot of folders and layers, maybe with the same names, and it's hard to look for what we need. So, we can use this timeline to go to the cell we want to use as reference, grab it from the editing section, remember that this is like the layers panel, drop it in the general light table, move to the cell we're working on, and drop it into the visual light table. In general, but especially for full body animation, the recommendation is to start with stick figures, or in fancier words, the gesture drawing. This helps us focus on the idea, the energy, and solve the movement first without worrying about the character design. The gesture drawing is also useful as a planning stage. Here we can decide if we are going to divide the character, how many layers will we need, and how to arrange them. For the gesture drawing, I like to apply the Change Layer Color filter. I particularly love the default blue color. I even call this first animation pass Blue Pass. You can use the Change Layer Color to distinguish your rough animation passes, especially if you end up with several rounds. You can apply it to the layers or to the whole folder. Reducing the opacity works, but sometimes it's convenient to have a bigger contrast, particularly when doing the tie-down pass or clean pass. Speaking of tie-down, whether you're working on a crew or working all the processes solo, there are stages of tidying up and cleaning the drawings. It may not be the final line art, but I still recommend using vector layers to tie down your animation. For this process, you don't need to draw fast and freely. You need precision and meticulousness. Drawing freehand may strain your arm. Instead of making a line and undoing infinitely, what vector layers offer is the possibility to edit your lines. So for example, I could draw lines using the figure tool, maybe with the curve tool, and then the straight line, and then the very useful Bezier curve. And because this is a vector layer, I can use the correct line tool and the subtools available to change and fix them. You can also draw freehand, even with your preferred brush, and I can use the pinch subtool to move it. The control point tool may have a problem because freehand lines have tons of points, but we can use the Simplify Vector Line subtool, go over the line one time, and this will reduce the points to the necessary, making the line movable. The correct line tool has a lot of subtools, so check them out, you're gonna love them. And there is also the amazing vector eraser. You can draw lines, not worrying about where they have to end, very intuitively, because with vectors, the software detects where 2 points cross, and just a simple stroke of the vector eraser deletes the leftover lines automatically. I invite you to explore the possibilities. Vector layers are a game changer. Those were the 10 tips I had prepared. Did you find something useful? Which one was your favorite? Check out my video on the rulers I use as an anime animator, and subscribe to keep hearing more tips and tricks for animation. See you in the next one!